Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about the statewide cooperative partnership for local and regional markets. Today, we'll be sharing some of the data and outcomes from a recent 3-year project aimed at collecting more representative data on Minnesota's local and regional markets. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we look forward to sharing and engaging in some dialogue. All right, so before we get started, please be aware that the MDA is recording this session to post on our website, including the MDA's YouTube channel, so that others can view this presentation afterwards. Under state law, the recording of this public session will also be available to anyone who asks to see it. You are certainly welcome to turn off your camera at any time in the presentation. So today's webinar is hosted by the Minnesota Department of Agriculture and the University of Minnesota, who joined forces in 2020 to launch the statewide cooperative partnership. My name is Kate Siebold, and I'm the Farm to Institution Coordinator at the MDA, and I've had the joy of working on this project for the past 2 years. And today you'll also be hearing from my colleagues at the University of Minnesota's College of Food, Agriculture, and Natural Resource Sciences, who I'll let introduce themselves next.
Greetings, I'm Hikaru Peterson. I'm in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota, and it's been a joy to be involved in this project for the past 3 years.
And I'm Casey McNichols, and I'm a graduate student also in the Department of Applied Economics at the University of Minnesota.
And we also want to note that while you'll be hearing from the 3 of us today, there were many, many more people who played a critical role in this project, from additional staff at MDA and the University of Minnesota, partner members of our project team who served as an advisory group throughout the 3-year project, and ultimately all of the members of the cooperative partnership, who we'll be highlighting a little bit more later in the presentation. So the plan for today's webinar is to provide an introduction to the statewide cooperative partnership and discuss our data collection endeavor, including how we collected data on local and regional markets in Minnesota, some of our key findings, and the framework that we've developed to support putting this data into action. Then we'll wrap up by sharing a little bit about takeaways and lessons learned from this project, what's ahead for the partnership, and how you can get involved. It feels a little bit like an ambitious agenda, but we do hope to have some time for Q&A at the end as well. So to start, what is the Cooperative Partnership for Local and Regional Markets? The Cooperative Partnership, as we mentioned, is led by the MDA and the University of Minnesota, but it's a group of more than 40 partner organizations that joined together in 2020 to provide input on the diverse experiences of small and mid-sized producers, retailers, and consumers across the state, and pursue a collaborative approach for local and regional market support in Minnesota. The launching of the statewide cooperative partnership and our initial 3-year project that we'll be discussing today was supported by a USDA federal state marketing improvement program grant that the MDA received. And we do have a website that you can see here, and then we'll put in the chat for where you can find more information about this project. As a partnership, collaboration has really been at the heart of this work, and we're grateful for the many partners that have played a role in this project. So you can see some of their logos here on the screen. These partners and many others have helped really at every stage of this project, from collecting background community knowledge, helping to develop our surveys, doing outreach for survey response collection, reviewing the data, and strategizing about what's to come. Our guiding purpose over the last 3 years has been to establish baseline data of local and regional markets in Minnesota so that we can respond to market issues and needs and pursue a more collaborative approach for dedicated ongoing local and regional market support in this state. And the impetus for this project was the understanding that consistent and representative data about Minnesota's local and regional food systems is a stepping stone to building out data-informed programs that support small and mid-sized and emerging producers and supporting greater market access to local foods. So with data, we can properly and more equitably respond to market issues and needs by developing informed programs, services, and policies. And we can identify and inform future research on local and regional markets. So here is the work that we set out to do in our 3-year project. After forming the cooperative partnership in 2020, the first year of this project was dedicated to information gathering, including background research, asset mapping, and preliminary community knowledge gathering, which we'll be sharing about later on. Then in 2022, we developed and conducted 3 surveys to collect data from producers, supply chain partners, and consumers around the state. And then in 2023, we engaged in collective strategizing. We worked with partners and stakeholders to review the data, document what the data is telling us, and think about, what our priorities and strategies are for how to support market development moving forward based on the data that we've seen. So I'll pass it to Casey next.
Yes, I'm just going to touch on what we learned in year 1 before we began our data collection process. And so the first year of our partnership really began with gathering what we already know through working with our partners and then other community organizations. And so to do this, there was a series of several different activities we did as a partnership. The first one was an asset mapping exercise where we identified opportunities for community connectors who should be involved on the project. And then we also looked at existing work in this area, as well as gathering research needs that our partners identified would be helpful. We also, during this year, did a literature review where we considered what was going on in Minnesota's food system and agriculture, particularly for specialty crop growers and small and mid-sized farmers, as well as looking at similar work in other states and other organizations who have done similar projects. And then finally, we had a series of community engagement contracts where we provided funding for our partners to work with producers in their network to identify specific needs from their partners. And so this slide just provides a little bit of a summary of some things that we heard going into the project. Some of the key things were that networks and collaboration are really important. So many of the producers that we planned on working with were relying extensively on really formal or informal networks and hearing things through other farmers or people in their communities. We also heard about how effective communication was really the key to making this project a success, and that while language is often an upfront barrier for certain producers, solutions have to really reach beyond just translation and really have to be focused on working through these existing networks. We also identified that the current data collection going on is not reaching a broad range of individuals. And this really just enforces the need for increased support for emerging farmers who face additional barriers to success, and how we should leverage partnerships between the state, nonprofits, and other organizations to really invest in these producers. I'm going to turn it back over to Hikaru.
Yes, the baseline data collection process actually spanned more than a year. We wanted to make sure that we had spent plenty of time in designing the instruments and the distribution process so that it can reach as widely as possible. And we gained so much valuable input from all our partners in designing all of our surveys. And we started implementing them in a way in order of the supply chain, starting from the upstream producers all the way down to the consumers. And after many months of designing, it was always a joy to have the actual survey in the field. And so we celebrated survey launches in a virtual way in February of 2022, and then subsequently the supply chain survey in August of 2022, and then consumer survey almost a year ago. Once the surveys were launched, we really relied on another round of partner and community engagement to reach our target audience. And here's one such a quote from one such valuable partner. Nancy is saying that she works with the Hmong American Partnership, and they represent the Hmong community here in Minnesota. Farming and agricultural work is in our DNA. among farmers and farmers market vendors are huge here in Minnesota. So being part of this data collection is so important to make sure that our community voices is heard. And other partners were just so invaluable in making sure that our survey reached as many folks as were possible. And so at the end of all of these, we were able to gain 497 responses to our producer survey, 37 businesses and entities that were involved in the supply chain, from processing, distribution, retail, and food service provision, and then also 820 consumer surveys, consumers in the state of Minnesota as well. And so through all of this, as we note here, the second round of community connector contracts are really invaluable, and we feel like it really enriched our data collection process as well. So I'm gonna turn it back to Casey to give us an overview of who our respondents were and just like 1 or 2 highlights from each of the survey.
So this just provides a quick overview of the producer survey. So on the left, you can see how our state was represented by the survey. There was a lot of concentration in the metro area, but as you can see, the survey really did reach into all corners of the state. And then on the right, we have 2 pie charts that are comparing the farm size distribution from the 2017 agricultural census with the responses from our producer survey. And the big takeaway from this is that the survey that we ran as a partnership reached much smaller producers who are farming less land than those represented in the ag census. And we should also note that our participation included a much higher proportion of producers who are working in the specialty crop sector, including fruits, vegetables, tree nuts and herbs, and nursery crops. To kind of confirm this, when we asked survey participants directly about their participation in the 2017 or earlier ag censuses, about 63% of our survey participants indicated that they hadn't been participating in the ag census in the past. And this is really showing how our survey captures different producers than those reported in the ag census. This kind of depicts how the survey compared in terms of demographic comparison. You can see that the sample is quite different than the Census of Agriculture data. In addition to the differences in demographics, we also had a lot more producers who were selling through direct-to-consumer channels. About 78% of the producers that we surveyed indicated that they're selling directly to consumers, and then we also had more producers who were farming organically. So in the 2017 ag census, this was about 1%, while in this survey, it was about 13%. The producer survey also provided some new insights into the different experiences that producers had. And so one example that we really wanted to highlight here is the differences in market access. So on the top, we can see that those with different scales of operation in terms of farm size are really using different market channels. And this really highlights those direct-to-consumer and direct-to-institution operations that are maybe not picked up in existing data. On the bottom, we also see that different groups of producers are experiencing different barriers in terms of accessing market channels. For example, operators of minority-owned and immigrant-owned farms face higher incidence of barriers in terms of finding buyers, pricing their products below cost, transportation, logistics, and communication compared to other groups of farmers. This provides a brief overview of the supply chain survey that we also ran, which is much smaller. We had 37 businesses that answered from various supply chain sectors. We had a relatively even representation from different functions along the supply chain, including processing, distribution, retail, and food service. And we gained lots of information about how these organizations are buying farm-raised products for their operations. One of the more interesting questions we asked was about the requirements for buying fresh food directly from farms. And we heard about certain organizations were really leaned on, having food safety plans, liability insurance, or kind of an interesting one is that some organizations really prioritized having on-farm visits before they were willing to produce or purchase from producers. We also ran a consumer survey We obtained a randomly stratified sample of Minnesota consumers using Qualtrics to administer our survey to. And this map shows who we heard from in both the metro region and then the greater state as well. And this survey provided a lot of insight into consumers' experiences with interacting with local and farm-raised products. We heard from this that the definition of local varies greatly among the consumers we surveyed, but about 58% of the consumers defined local as food that was sourced in Minnesota. People also generally think of local foods as better than foods from non-local places in terms of the community impact and quality of the products.
So this was like a whirlwind, just a taste of information that we have gathered from our baseline data. And we have 2 recorded webinars where we discuss these data in a little bit more depth. And so please check them out. The part 1, there was actually a 3-part webinar series about the statewide cooperative partnership, but the first one on March 3rd and the second one May 3rd, and then the second one on May 10th were specifically focused on different aspects of the data. So please check that out. And we're also making sure that everyone has access to this baseline data. We're using the data repository for the University of Minnesota to do this. And I think Casey will be dropping a link on the chat. But you can also find, if you lose it, you can always go to our website on the statewide cooperative partnership to find the link to the data repository as well. I'm sorry, it's still a work in progress, but here's what you will find once you actually get there in its full state. And so for the producer and supply chain surveys, we are making it available in an item-by-item summary of response reports. This is to make sure that the anonymity is preserved in our data, because it's not, once you actually look at where the producers are responding from and what they do, it might be really possible to narrow it down to a few handful of farmers, and that's not what we want to do. For the consumer survey data, it is available in entirety. According to the policy of the repository, some of the demographic data had to be withheld, but if you contact me or Kate, that we would make sure that you'll have access to them as well. We also created a set of data summaries in tables and figures format in 2 file formats, one in Word and one in Excel. The Word files have tables and figures with alt text so that you can simply copy and paste them into your website or into your documents. But I know that many of you actually want to see the data that's behind the graphics, for example, or you might want to format it in a fancier way. And so the Excel file contains the data that's used to generate those tables and figures, and so you can format them to your liking. So these tables and figure files are available for statewide numbers and also at regional levels, because our state is in fact diverse geographically. There are many ways that Minnesota regions are defined. We're finding out, even for those of us who work in the food and ag context. But we decided to base our regions on the Minnesota Farm Link regions. As you can see, some of the regions had to be combined to ensure that there were sufficient response numbers, particularly from the producer survey. But there will be 7 regional summaries in the end. And you can see that there'll be Central, East Central, Metro, Southeast, and then the combined regions in the North Central and Northeast, Northwest and West Central, and then Southwest and South Central.
All right, so next we want to talk a little bit about how the cooperative partnership has been thinking about putting this data that we have into action to support market development and support for small and emerging farmers in our state. So as briefly described earlier, the final year of our 3-year project was dedicated to collaborative data review and strategizing, with the goal of developing a roadmap or framework of sorts to guide and support collective local and regional market development in Minnesota. So this process started just about a year ago in February of 2023 when we hosted a data party and workshop for partners and stakeholders, just to really come together in person. It was the first time that the cooperative partnership had met in person, and it was a really nice time to just, again, build connections and deepen our work together. But attendees really got to dive into the data. We had folks gather around tables with big posters showing different pieces of data. And we asked attendees to help us document what the data is telling us. And then based on what we are seeing in the data, think about action moving forward. And so we asked attendees to consider what we need to keep doing, what is important to introduce or start doing, what do we perhaps need to stop doing, and what current actions need changing, and what is that change that's needed. And so all of this served as the foundation for a framework for local and regional market development that we'll be sharing today. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about what the data party and workshop looked like, we do have a video and then even a shorter trailer on our website that kind of highlights the data party. For many people, myself included, it was the first data party that I attended, but I think it was a really great way to build excitement and energy around this data and put our minds together to make sure that we were all, helping to share and collect what this data is telling us. So we took all of the ideas and input gathered at the data party and tried to organize it into main themes and leading strategies for supporting farmers and market development in Minnesota based on what the data was telling us. And this framework was then further refined over the spring and summer based on feedback that we received through a public webinar in May. Following those two webinars that Hikaru had mentioned, where we presented the data, we then had a webinar where we provided the draft framework, and members of the public were able to provide feedback. And as previously mentioned, a real defining part of this project was its pursuit of building a collaborative approach for market development. So not only was this framework developed collaboratively, but the hope is that it will be used collaboratively by partners and stakeholders around the state so that we can be collectively working, in alignment with shared purposes and goals. So we have a few quotes that I think just kind of help to capture how different partners are thinking about how the data and framework can be used in their work. So this quote is from Lillian Otieno, who's the director of the Emerging Farmers Office at the Minnesota Department of Agriculture. And Lillian said, "Data is telling the stories of the farmers. We need these data points to inform policy and to inform how we as an agency can go back and look at the work we're doing within the regional food system. I'm hopeful that we can continue to do this work, especially with our partners. Engagement, outreach, communication is so critical as a foundation for us to be successful in service delivery." And then Sina Plegencool from Minnesota Farmers Market Association shared, "We're providing services and programs and leadership to the over 350 farmers markets in the state. We need to know what direction to take. With hard data that we can reflect on, we can map exactly where we need to go with the services we provide. Also, that data is a tool for us to go to the Capitol and have proof of why we need to continue to support our local farming community." So with that, let's dig into the framework a bit. There are 7 priority areas that you see here on the screen: procedural equity, outreach, education, and engagement, funding support structures, market data transparency, built and organizational infrastructure, relationship building with tribal nations, and networking and collaboration. Inspired by the icons that the UN developed for the Sustainable Development Goals, each priority area has an icon for easy identification and communication. And under each priority area, there are specific strategies tied to the data that we collected. And so we'll walk through those strategies and some of the data behind it. So first, we'll start with procedural equity and inclusion, because really this is not just one of the 7 priority areas, but really the overarching and foundational principle for all of the priority areas and strategies to follow. This was something that partners and stakeholders really emphasized throughout the project. that equity needs to be embedded in each of the priority areas and in every step of the work. So the icon for this priority area is a tree for a reason. Equity is the root system and structural body of this work, and our data-informed strategies can be thought of as the leaves and fruit of the tree. They represent how we can engage, serve, collaborate, and invest in ways that prioritize and advance equity and inclusion in Minnesota's markets and food system. The second priority area focuses on relationship building with tribal nations and communities. We know that this project did not collect representative data from within Minnesota's tribal nations, which represent a significant part of Minnesota's food system. And so we need to continue to build relationships with tribal nations to ensure that tribal perspectives are incorporated into local and regional market development, and to learn if and how the MDA and partners can support or assist in future data collection led by or conducted in partnership with tribal nations. So this means that we need to establish relationships with tribes and communities before asking for data, visiting and listening to tribal communities, and genuinely learning about each individual tribe and their potential data needs. In addition, it means the state allocating time and resources to collaborate with their tribes and their internal processes. The third priority area focuses on education, outreach, and engagement. And the first strategy listed here is to dedicate funding for contracts with tribal nations and community organizations, including specifically BIPOC organizations, to support equitable outreach and engagement. So we saw the importance of this in this project. 38% of the responses that we received to the producer survey came from producers with a direct connection to one of the community connectors that received funding to support our outreach and engagement around the survey. The second strategy outlines the need for more technical assistance, training, and information for emerging farmers that are culturally appropriate and offered in multiple languages. And the final two strategies that we'll talk about on the following slides address consumer education and expansion of food safety services. So the third strategy in this area is to educate consumers on the value of local food and where to get it. And data from our consumer survey showed that consumers do value locally produced food, but with 61% reporting that they care about where their food comes from. But that 61% also shows that there's an opportunity to do more education and engagement with some consumers on the value of local food. The data also shows that consumers want more local food and that they would buy more local food if it was labeled, with 64% saying that they would buy more if labeled. And so again, this speaks to the opportunity for more engagement and education on where and how to find local food when shopping. And then the fourth strategy in this priority area focuses on expanding food safety services that meet the needs of small, mid-sized, and emerging producers. So the data from the producer survey showed that 73% of farmers indicated that they see positive returns to investing in on-farm food safety practices. So we need to ensure that outreach and education services that support the implementation of on-farm food safety practices are available to and meeting the needs of all farmers. The fourth priority area is funding support structures. So data from the producer survey showed that sales, crop acreage, and land ownership rates are lower among minority and immigrant farmers in Minnesota. So the strategies in this section really focus on how to provide needed support to build equity and provide more targeted support to these producers. So the first strategy addresses equitably investing in small, mid-sized, and emerging farmers through grants, loans, and cost shares, all of which can help producers purchase land, equipment, insurance, things that are needed for producers to achieve stability, growth, and market access. Partners also saw a need to advocate for an insurance safety net for local producers. And finally, in the third strategy highlights how funding opportunities can also help to increase procurement and consumption of local food thereby helping to create market access for more producers.
The fifth priority is in the area of market data transparency, and I will walk through them in the next few slides. So our baseline data showed, as Casey had a slide there, that there are many producers who are currently not represented in the agricultural census. And so that's our first strategy in this area, is to make sure we collaborate with the USDA to increase the producer participation in the Census of Agriculture. Our work also shows that it is critical to continue the statewide cooperative partnerships network-based data collection to supplement and learn about the experiences of these producers that may not already be in the structure of agricultural census to be counted. Another strategy that's related to market data transparency is to build a stronger data infrastructure to provide up-to-date market data for local food producers. Our data show that market data can help our system become more equitable by helping producers with pricing decisions where certain groups like minority and immigrant farmers are disproportionately struggling. And it is not just the data that should be strengthened for greater equity. Our data is showing that these minority and immigrant farmers face greater barriers in market access, whether it's in the challenges of finding buyers or also in terms of transportation and logistic barriers. And so in this priority area of infrastructure, the built-in organizational part of it, we have identified the strategy to invest in built infrastructure that will expand the capacity to aggregate, distribute, and sell local food in communities such as at farmers markets. And then in addition to this farmer-oriented infrastructure, we should also strengthen other parts of the supply chain as well. And so the second strategy in this priority area is to sustain and expand programming aimed at getting more local food into institutions, retail stores, regional distributors, and places where consumers already shop. And then we also note that the Minnesota Grown program is valuable to the members. You can see that 91% of the members really report that the programming is valuable to them. But of the producers who completed the survey, only 54% were members. And so the last strategy in this area is to increase the reach and impact of our Minnesota Grown program so that we can help build demand for local food and agricultural products and help the producers connect with buyers. And then the last one in this priority area, I'm sorry, there's a fourth one. Our baseline data identified different barriers that are faced by different farmer groups related to farmland access. And so therefore, we should continue to sustain and grow programs that provide these valuable farmland access services. And then the last priority area that emerged from our baseline data was on networking and collaboration. In particular, across all types of farmers, one common thread was their reliance on each other for information. And that's something that we collectively can promote. And so we can expand opportunities for farmer-to-farmer networking and information sharing. And then also, our conversation at the data party brought up the call for more collaboration within and between state agencies and local governments. Each bodies are doing separate work, separate good work, but I think if we can pull our collective work together, that we can reduce redundancy, but we can also be more than some of the individual parts. And also, lastly, during the last 6 months, we have heard from the partners that there are interest and support for continuing this work. And so the last strategy that we leave with you is to continue to convene the statewide cooperative partnership for local and regional markets as a space for building relationships, coordinating efforts, and tracking progress.
Right. So we know that probably felt like a whirlwind to review all of those 7 priority areas and the strategies and some of the data as part of them. But I will just note that on the statewide cooperative partnership website, we do have all of the priority areas and strategies listed. And we will also share out these slides afterwards for you to be able to see some of that data as well. All right, so this project really sought to do something new and to collect new or missing data. And we've, I think, learned a lot through this process as we've been reflecting on the last 3 years. So, some takeaways and lessons learned, the data that we collected, first and foremost, shows or confirms that many of Minnesota's small and emerging farmers are not captured in the ag census data that we have, and speaks the need for, as Hikaru mentioned in the market data transparency section, to really think about how we can help to ensure that more of our producers are being captured in the ag census, but also continue to think about what are the specific supplemental data needs for our state and tribal nations. And the data that we collected also shows gaps, needs, and opportunities for market development and market access. And so, I think the data has shown us that we have work to do, and this data can help us do that. And finally, I think another takeaway that we've been reflecting on from this project is that people want data and that data is valued. We were, when preparing for this presentation, reflecting on the data party and just remembering the really great energy that was in the room and the excitement that many partners shared about having this data. And since then, we've continued to hear from different folks about how they are already using this data in their work. And so that was a really great outcome from this project, and we hope that we can continue to build on that interest and momentum. As we think about future data collection, we know that this is baseline data. And so while this data shows us a lot, it's just a starting point, and we need more data to be able to really see change and impact over time. And, this project sought to establish a more equitable and inclusive data collection process. And we do see that our data represents, many producers that were not previously represented in ag census data for Minnesota, but we also know that not all producers are represented in this data. So, we need to continue to work to make data collection more inclusive and accessible and equitable. And I think that we've learned a lot through this process and project that can inform and support future data collection efforts, including, that this project has underscored the need to continue building relationships with tribal nations and, learn if and how the MDA and others can support or assist in future data collection. This project demonstrated the value of those community connector contracts. I really think we would not have been able to collect the data that we did without all of the many partners and individuals who helped with outreach and helping producers fill out the surveys. We also learned the value in collaborative survey development. Many partners offered tremendously valuable input and feedback on the surveys as they were being developed. And finally, I think that we also learned, some valuable insights into timing, particularly around the producer survey that can help with future data collection as well. And then finally, we learned about the collaborative approach. Casey outlined some of the things that we learned from partners and communities, going into this project around communication and, building of trust. And we've continued to learn more throughout the process. And we've, learned that it takes time and consistent investment in relationships, communication and coordination, but that we've also, seen and heard from partners that there's real value in this collaborative approach, which is why we're really excited to be able to continue, working as a partnership in this work moving forward. So what's ahead for the partnership now that this 3-year project is over? As Hikari mentioned, we did hear from partners and interest for the partnership to continue to meet. And so this will likely, involve meetings between 2 to 4 times a year, with the purpose of continuing to support communication and data sharing. So making sure that this data is and the framework, it's getting out there, and that we're building trust in this work and community involvement. Continued meetings will also provide an opportunity to share updates and progress on our individual and collective work, on the strategies and priority areas that we've identified, and explore where there's opportunities for more collaboration and partnership on different projects. We'll also be able to, discuss data and future research needs. And finally, just continue to nurture relationships across our food system. So we hope that all of you will join us and engage in kind of the next chapter of the partnership. And you can do that in different ways. So, first and foremost, we hope that you will use the data and use the framework that we have. So make sure to go to the Cooperative Partnership website, look at it, maybe bookmark the data repository site where you can access all of the data, because we ultimately want it to, be out there being used and informing all of the work that all of us are doing to support our local and regional markets and food systems. You can also help in sharing the data and framework with others, help us spread the word, help us expand our partnership and the connections that we have. And then we also hope that you'll keep in touch. So one thing you can do is, if you haven't already, you can subscribe to the Statewide Cooperative Partnerships e-newsletter, which that's the QR code on the screen. That will be a way, kind of as we transition into this next phase for the partnership, to stay in touch with a lot of folks. And we also hope that you'll consider attending future meetings, and subscribing to the newsletter will be a great way to hear about those once those are scheduled. And if you are sitting and thinking about the data and the framework and feeling like there's really, you're seeing opportunities to align your work with the cooperative partnership and have ideas, reach out to us, and we'd love to talk and learn more and see how we can work together. And so with that, these are our email addresses, and we would love to stay in touch. And it looks like we did manage to get through all of our content in time for some Q&A. So if anyone has questions, we would be happy to answer those. And I'm not